Well, first of all, I think it's the best job in the world. So I'm very lucky to be doing what I love. I basically research the history of houses for people. That's the basis of it. So people hire me and I go in and I look at both the history of the building construction, so when it was built and what style it is and who it was built by. And I also look at the families that lived there, so who it was built for, and then who's lived there over the years as well, and try and tell the stories of those people and uncover more about their lives.
So why houses?
I don't really know. It's just of all the areas, I mean, I love all of history, but buildings to me have always been fascinating. And I think it is that combination of being able to actually look at the physical evidence in the house and combine it with the documentary evidence I can find in archives and then put together a whole story, I guess. So I love the physical investigation and detective work at actually looking at a house and working out when it was built from the style, or looking at what's changed and where walls have been moved and that type of thing. But I really don't know. It's a bit of a mystery where the house thing came from.
And how long have you been doing this for? And have you had cases all around Queensland?
I have. I've been doing it now full time for probably close to about 7 or 8 years, I think it is. But yes, I have researched houses and buildings as well. That's the other thing I do, but mainly houses, all over Queensland, all over Australia, in fact. So it's absolutely awesome. And the one thing I love about it is I learn so much about the local area that I'm researching as well as the house. So I feel like my knowledge is always increasing, which is wonderful.
So what do people want to know, Marianne? What are some of the reasons for them wanting to find out these things?
A variety of reasons. Most people, I would say the number one thing they want to find out is when their house was built. That's generally the main thing they're looking for. Sometimes most of the times it's just out of general interest, but sometimes it's also for planning requirements. So in Brisbane, if a house is built before 1946 or before 1911, there's different development restrictions that apply. So that's probably my number one query. Another query I often get is if the house ever had a name. Sometimes people want to put up a plaque on the outside of the house, so they want to try and find an original name for the house. But otherwise, it's generally a range of different reasons. Some people are just wanting to know more about the house to maybe connect with it a bit more before they do renovation work and understand how it would have been originally, get the details right. I was researching a house at Kangaroo Point recently, and the veranda had been enclosed and they wanted to reopen it, but they wanted to make sure they got the railings sympathetic and close to what would have been there originally, so I was able to help with that. So they're probably the main reasons. A lot of people are just curious as well.
What about before someone buys a house? Some people, looking before they sign a contract for some answers?
Sometimes, mostly people contact me if the house is already heritage protected, either on a local council register or on a state register, and they're generally looking to find out what they can and can't change in a house in general before they invest in it. But I think in general, people have in general an idea that you can't change a single thing in heritage listed places, and it's just not true. There's a lot you can do, and it's always better for a heritage place to be lived in and looked after, even if that means a little bit of compromise to modernise it and that sort of thing. But, they're not about trying to keep these houses as museums and not allowed to change anything. Most of the times, most of the interiors can be altered in local homes. So it is a little bit extra responsibility and a little bit extra expense. But, effectively, you're a caretaker of an important building in Australia's history. So it's a bit of a trade-off, I guess.
Do you get many cases where people want to know, is this a murder house or did someone die here?
Look, let's face it, everyone wants a scandalous story. Well, most people anyway. And I think, they tend to make the most interesting stories, but they can also be quite confronting as well. And I have to be a little bit tactful sometimes and sort of suss out how much the people may want to know or may not want to know. So, yeah, I think people are always keen to find out if something out of the ordinary has happened in their place. The scandals I'm talking about aren't recent history. They're going to be probably pre-1960s most of the times, and a lot of the times much earlier than that. So I think that little bit of separation probably helps people, embrace the stories more than something that's happened a couple of years ago.
And how do you find out that sort of information, about the people that live there, especially when they might be, going back decades and even centuries?
It's actually really time consuming because unfortunately there's not one source that I can go to. So what I love about my job is it is complete detective work. It is going back and I often buy the titles for the property, which gives me the names of the previous landowners. And then I start from there and I search old newspapers, I search census records, I search electoral rolls, I search post office directories. Increasingly I'm using social media more as well. Some Facebook pages like Lost Brisbane, for example, or Lost Mackay are fabulous for finding old photos and connecting with possible descendants of families. It's really interesting because I never know where each house is going to take me. I'll follow the clues just like a detective. I'll follow the leads and it'll take me down a certain path, and that will uncover other information which will lead me to other things. So yeah, I never know where I'm going to end up, and I always end up learning something new though.
I'm just picturing your office, in your house with all of this paper stuck to the walls, pinned to the walls, and like screens everywhere. Is that what it's like?
The red wool joining the thumbtacks all over my wall. Yeah, well, not quite, but that's effectively mentally what it's like.
On ABC Tropical North and Capricornia, you're hearing from Marianne Taylor, the house detective. She's an architectural historian who basically uncovers the mystery of houses. Marianne, you touched there on some of the things that you look for when you're doing the back end stuff, documents, titles, that sort of stuff. But what about the clues that you look for when you're actually visiting a house or building?
Sure. Well, the first thing I always do when I'm researching a house is have a look at it. If it's because I'm based in Brisbane, if it's elsewhere, I'll bring it up on Google Street View or ask them to send me a photo, because to me, the style of the house tells me so much already. I can normally narrow down the date of construction within, say, about a 20-year period just by looking at the style of the house, which then means I've got a basis to when I'm looking at other information, I then know the rough period to look at when I'm referring to the house construction. But in terms of the house, I always try to look at how it would have been originally. So sometimes it's really obvious, like the case I mentioned earlier where the veranda's been enclosed. And I know from that era house and that style of house that it would have had an open front veranda. Other things I look for inside are probably, I'm almost looking for things that look out of place, I guess. So another house I researched, it had, everyone in Queensland will know the traditional Queenslanders with the breezeways above the doorways, the fretwork breezeways. And this was a very old house, but it had glass ones, which I knew were out of place for that era of house. So I knew that was probably a later addition. But also I look at evidence if I can see where there used to be walls. Early houses often had a lot of small rooms rather than the big open plan houses that we're used to these days. So I can look at how the floor prints changed. I sometimes even climb under the house. I actually often climb under houses or up in the roof space to have a look if there's been any alterations and I can see any extensions or changes that have happened. So, yes, that's what I like about it. As I said, it's the physical investigation as well as the hiding out in archives part.
Now, you made a trip up to some of our local spots recently, especially around Mackay. But let's start near Biloela. There was a homestead you went to see. Where was it?
Oh my gosh, Kilburnie Homestead, just outside of Biloela. It is the most amazing place. It's probably one of the most amazing historic homes I've ever been to. I actually researched it for a job last year, and I got in contact with the owners and ended up chatting to them, and I've since had coffees with them and met them up there. And it is the most amazing hidden gem. So the property was established in 1883 by the Campbell family, and they've basically farmed the area ever since. And the homestead is this amazing high-set timber and tin building, and it's just such a step back in time. I know that's a cliche, but it is actually, you go in there and you feel like the family have in the 1800s have just popped out for lunch or something. It's absolutely incredible. The collection in the house is amazing as well. There's so much beautiful old furniture. And, the fact that it's directly connected to the family that first settled it is really incredible to have as well. And there's so much documentation and books and artworks. It's just absolutely incredible. And Yeah, shameless plug. I highly recommend a visit, and it's worth a visit too because it has all the original outbuildings like the blacksmith's forge and all that type of thing. And a couple of members of the Campbell family are actually buried there, so their graves are there as well. It's just amazing. It's a real insight into life back in those times.
You then climbed up further through the Central Highlands before hitting Mackay. Where else did you visit along the way?
Oh my gosh, we went to so many amazing places. So we actually we actually came through Croombit Tops National Park and did the Razorback track before we got to Biloela. And that was just amazing. I highly recommend that if you've got a four-wheel drive. It was the most beautiful trip. But just so many places. We stopped in Jaringa and explored that town, which has got an amazing heritage trail with signage everywhere. And I sort of stumbled across that. And then my poor husband, he's like, oh gosh, we just stopped in here for a quick visit and now we're going to be here for hours.
If you've just tuned in on ABC Tropical North and Capricornia, Marianne Taylor is with us. She is the house detective and architectural historian in Queensland, and she's just been recently visiting through places in our regions. Moving up to Mackay now, Marianne, and one of the spots you were really keen to get to this building was the Sugar Research Institute building. What's the story there?
Oh my gosh, this building it caught my attention when we've been in Mackay previously, and I made sure that we stopped there this time. In the process of reading about it while I was up there, I discovered it was, and I can't take credit for this, it was in the heritage listing, but it was actually designed by Carl Langer and built in 1953. Now, Carl Langer was probably the foremost architect in post-war Queensland. He was really well known and he brought some really interesting sort of modernist styles from Europe into his designs, and they were specifically focused on being built to suit the climate. But the building itself is just incredible. I mean, it's a very simple stripped back style, which was common in the post-war era and common with that modernist sort of architecture. But I just think, the fact that it was purpose built for this Sugar Research Institute and it had laboratories and it had meeting rooms and just the work of the Sugar Research Institute where they basically, I mean, most people in Mackay and the region will probably know a lot more about sugar than I do. But, it was designed to test different types of sugar cane and improve the efficiency of processes from the growing to the milling to the transportation. So it was such an important research centre, and it's just such a striking building, and I'm just so pleased that it survived. It's quite incredible and such a reminder of what an integral part of Mackay's history sugar was, and the whole region for that matter.
Yeah, and it's hard to miss it from the highway when you drive past. You're right, it is very striking and it looks like it's in very good nick.
It does look like it's in pretty good condition. I have to admit, I was a little bit thwarted because it's being redeveloped at the moment into a college, so there's safety fences all around it. I would have liked to have had a closer look, but it does look like it's in pretty good condition, and I think a redevelopment will really, hopefully done sympathetically, will bring new life into it, and hopefully see that any repairs that need to be done are done and ensure its ongoing survival.
Now, where else did your detective curiosity take you around the Mackay region?
I have to start with Greenmount Homestead because that was a real highlight. It was absolutely incredible. Another farming homestead, but yet so different to Kilburnie, just totally different and different era, but also just a totally different a family that was quite wealthy, and they showed that in the construction and design of this house and the furnishing as well. And the fact that it basically remains in a setting that looks as it would have back then as well really adds to it. But it's just incredible again. And like Kilburnie, the collection that's inside it and the connection with the family that live there is just outstanding, and it's presented absolutely beautifully. I highly recommend a visit there as well. We spent basically a whole day just exploring the CBD at Mackay, and one of the amazing highlights was the customs house. I was lucky enough to get a private tour inside that, which is just absolutely spectacular. That building would be impressive in any capital city of Australia, but having it in Mackay is just amazing, and it really reflects the wealth that was in the area at the time it was built.
What's it like inside?
Oh, it's so good. It's dark, heavy timber, and then the main room is it's probably about 2 or 3 stories high in the main center of it, and there's big, beautiful windows and skylights, and it's this beautiful, bright space, and the big, dark, heavy timber counter from when it was actually the customs office is still there. And the old safe, a big walk-in safe with the big heavy metal doors still there.
No.
It's so cool. Like you can hear how excited I am. I'm such a nerd, but it's just incredible inside. It's just so intact and so well looked after. It's in beautiful condition, so that was a real treat. But there was so many other buildings. Oh, I just had a ball. We just wandered around and a couple that stick in my mind are some of the Art Deco ones like the Australian Hotel, and I fell in love with I think it was the Dalrymple building. There's all these beautiful green tiles going up the stairs, and I snuck upstairs and had a look around, and you could still see how it had been set out as offices and shops originally when it was built. So, yeah, being in Mackay and Billawheeler and up that way, we followed a lot of we looked at a lot of the railway heritage up that way as well, so around Mundubbera and that area. And I just learnt so much about the railway history, the history of the area, and it was just absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And my husband, although he was Mackay born and bred, I think he probably looked at things in a new light as well, seeing it through my eyes, like things that he would have taken for granted growing up. And yeah, for someone from outside and a massive building nerd like me getting all excited over it, he probably probably saw it a bit differently for a change.
He's thinking, nah, that's just where we used to grab a drink on a Friday, but here you are.
Yeah, there was a few comments like that. And he was saying too about Greenmount Homestead that he went out there for school visits, and he said it used to feel like about a half a day on the bus on the ride out there.
On ABC Tropical North and Capricornia, Marianne Taylor, the house detective, is with us. She's an architectural historian. Marianne, what would you say is one of the most emotional cases that you've ever had, a house that, you really got sucked into emotionally?
There's probably a couple, but one of the ones that I remember affecting me the most was a house at Corinda in Brisbane. And for a period during, I think it was the First World War, it was actually converted for use as a children's home. So it wasn't necessarily an orphanage as a lot of the places were, but it was for children who couldn't be looked after by their parents for whatever reason. So perhaps the father was away at war and the mother had to work to earn a living or something like that. But there's all these old photos of the dorm set up with all these old-fashioned metal cots for babies. And I don't know, that just really stuck with me and really got to me that, the generosity, I guess, of the lady who donated the house for use, and the fact that all these wonderful women were looking after these poor children who couldn't otherwise be looked after. And so that really stuck with me, I guess. I think that was a really important story from that house. And, these are the kind of hidden stories that might lie in any house. You just never know what you're going to uncover.
I suppose that's part of it, isn't it? Who was in this kitchen before me and what happened in this yard before I owned this house?
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of people might have even been told rumours either from the real estate agent or locals in the area about certain stories about a house or who lived there, or perhaps who it was built for and that type of thing. Sometimes they want to check if they're true or not. So it can be a whole variety of different reasons.
And like other detectives, do you still have cold cases, ones that, that are still mysteries in a sense you still need to research a bit more?
I'm really glad you asked that because, effectively you can go on indefinitely researching these places. I pretty much have been... I can't think of anything offhand that has really stumped me. For every house, there's sometimes things you can't uncover, or you can only find a teasing little trace of something. But generally, for every house, I can put together a really detailed history. It's interesting that you asked that question, though, because I did a family history research job for a gentleman in Victoria recently, and he was trying to find when his ancestor arrived in Australia and what ship he arrived on, and no family members had been able to uncover it and no one was having any luck. And I didn't have any luck either until I suggested that we look at his naturalisation records, which were held at the National Archives of Australia. So I requested them to be digitised, and long story short, the records actually had when he arrived in Australia, where he arrived, what ship he was on, and where he came from. So I could then search backwards using the ship name to work out where he'd come from and that sort of thing. And the reason I couldn't find him was his name had been transcribed completely incorrectly by whoever wrote the ship's passenger list. So it hadn't turned up in a name search. But when I went back and searched just by the ship and the dates, it came up. So I was so excited to finally crack that case after a few months.
Gosh, some of it sometimes just must be trial and error. Like, how else could that name be transcribed, right?
It is, and I only just said to my husband yesterday, there's so much lateral thinking involved. So, having a whole heap of different evidence, exactly like you were saying about the detective wall with all the different bits of information and material and joining the dots up on the wall. It's exactly like that. Sometimes you can't find the direct piece of evidence, but by working out other related unconnected pieces, you can sometimes come up with the answer. So yeah, it's what I love about it. It keeps my brain active, that's for sure.